Welcome to the Resilience Files, a podcast investigating human stories of struggle and triumph in the quest to explore the true nature of well-being and resilience and discover the secret to a resilience that lasts. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce our guest today, Professor Anthony Kessel. Anthony is a longtime friend, colleague, and trustee of iheart, and I am so excited for you to hear this conversation. We speak about topics as diverse as how to deal with change, loving what we do, confronting our ego and our need for validation, to the pain and learning in going through a marriage breakdown and dealing with some of the darkest moments of our lives, and lots more. It was no easy task whittling down what has to be one of the most impressive bios I have ever come across. But what's even more impressive, as you will no doubt hear in this conversation, is what a humble, down-to-earth, curious, open-hearted, honest, and genuine person Anthony is. So Professor Anthony Kessel is a public health physician, GP, and academic. Anthony is currently working part-time as clinical director at NHS England. Prior to this, Anthony worked for a decade as Director of Global Public Health at Public Health England and National Director of Public Health Strategy. He's also currently the Senior Public Health Advisor to the Football Association and Advisor to the World Health Organization on public health. Anthony has over 100 publications in areas of public health, environmental health, and the medical humanities. He's trained as an executive coach and writes a personal column exploring his leadership work. Anthony is also the author of a 4-book adventure series for children, Don't Doubt the Rainbow. The first book, The 5 Clues, was published in 2021 and has been shortlisted for several national and international awards. The second book, Outside Chance, was published in July 2022. Threaded through the series is an approach to support mental health and resilience in this age group. You can find links to Anthony's works and books in the notes below. So Anthony, welcome to the Resilience Files. Great to have you.
Great to be here, and thank you for inviting me, Terry.
You're so welcome. I've been looking forward to this. So as everybody heard, your bio is off the charts. I mean, you're one of the most accomplished and multi-talented people that I know, and really impressive. And for that reason, there's so many different directions that we can go in this conversation. There's so many different aspects of your career and what you've accomplished that we could discuss. But what I'd like to focus on is, because this is the Resilience Files and what we're doing is investigating resilience and the barriers to it, I'd like to really hone in more, focus in on your human story, because with both the triumphs and the, and what is the opposite of triumphs and the struggles and everything in between, because I think that's something that everybody can relate to. So is that okay with you? If we
that's absolutely okay. Perfect.
Okay, brilliant. Before we begin, I do need to say congratulations, because your second book of the Don't Doubt the Rainbow series, which I have over here, Outside Chance, published by a major publishing house, Crown House, which is very impressive. And this is an adventure series for young people. And we are going to talk about this in the podcast, but I just wanted to start off by saying congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you. So, how did you, Professor Anthony Kessel, transition from being clinical director of the NHS England, which I know you're still involved in to a degree, but how did you transition into an author that managed to get this big publishing deal with, and I know, having written a book, how difficult that is with Crown House. That's not a usual transition to make. So can you kind of take us through how that occurred?
Well, it's a question that I've wondered about myself. How's this happened? And I can give you my sort of reflections or perspectives on what happened. And I think it probably goes back to childhood, to be honest. I was a reader and loved reading from very, very young age. I have memories of when the Bond film was on, and Dad saying, "Come down, watch the Bond film," and I'd be stuck in my Alfred Hitchcock Three Investigators book upstairs, and they couldn't understand why I wasn't raising down. It wasn't that I didn't like the Bond film, but I loved reading books. And at school, I loved the humanity. I like languages and humanities. I liked French and history and English literature, and I also liked the sciences to a degree, and maths, biology. But my dad had been a doctor. There was medicine in the family, and I did sciences at A level. Never liked chemistry or physics, and I went into medicine. But I think always that seed of interest in writing, in literature, in storytelling was always there. Straight after med school, I went to Cambridge and did a philosophy master's, and that got me even more interested and invested in writing and thinking in a very, very different way to what I'd learned in medicine. And I think that had been lurking there and had showed itself over the years in my academic work. So I've done a lot of writing on medical ethics and medical philosophy, and over the years, I think over 100 publications now. So it had shown itself in those ways. But I think the creative seed, and we talk about, our innate qualities and what makes people themselves. And I think for me, that's something that's always been inside. And it started germinating properly, I'd say about 10, 12 years ago, something like that, when I used to tell my daughter Leonie, who's now 21, so it is quite a few years ago, I used to tell her a Friday night story about a cat called Perch. And I did that every night, Friday night. It was the Shabbat treat. And did that every week, same characters in the same storyline, different adventures. And eventually, after about 2 years of this, my wife at the time, Elizabeth, said, "Well, tell me one of those stories." And I told her one of those stories, and she said, "It's a great story. You should write it down." I started writing down the stories, and I realized how much I enjoyed writing them down. And that became a self-published book in 2013, I think, the Amazing Adventures of Perch the Cat. And I found that the process of writing, the joy and the pleasure of connecting with that creative element inside me was so strong that I felt the need to and the wish to pursue that. And at the time, I had written 3 chapters of. You brought the second book out. I've also got the first book here in front of me. Okay. I'd written the first book in the series is called The 5 Clues, and I'd written the first 3 chapters of that actually. I think before I self-published the cat book, and something quite unusual happened, which is the great crime writer Ruth Rendell, Baroness Ruth Rendell. She got hold of a copy of the cat book, invited me and Leonie round, was very enthusiastic about it, and I used the opportunity to share with her the first 3 chapters that I'd written sometime before of the 5 Clues, the whole storyline, and she wrote back to me, emailed me. She's not alive anymore, but I've kept our interchanges, and said, how much she enjoyed it. It was fantastic. Keep on writing. And she was very supportive. And that's what happened. And that's that encouragement that, felt at the time really helpful, was invaluable. And I pushed on from there. And then it was a question really of just carrying on writing, following your own instinct, and attempting to get a publishing deal. And that's what happened with Crown House. And it's been an absolute joy working with them. And you said we'll come and talk about the books a bit later. But that's how that came. And it comes from, I think, a connection with an inner part of me that was there for a long time, but had just been dormant, or if that's the right word, or showing itself in different ways.
That's great. Thank you. And what a great story with Ruth Rendell. And it just speaks to the fact that when you kind of put something into the universe, it kind of speaks back to you. But it's almost like we need to take the first step. And I want to talk to you a little bit more about that transition, because a lot of people struggle with that, or with what you called connecting to something within you, that there's always been this spark of a writer, the spark of somebody who loved to write. But before I do that, just to show people how almost different and diverse your jobs are, would you mind sharing? You kind of were a couple of minutes late to the podcast, and you had said that you were involved in something. Can you just speak about what that was, to show the kind of stuff that you're dealing with on the one hand in the kind of NHS work that you're still involved in, because it's so different, and it's nice because it almost speaks to different sides of us. Often we see ourselves as one type of person that fits in one lane.
Well, and I think that is so true, though. None of us are one kind of person. It's social structures that steers us towards saying we're a parent, or we're a doctor, or we're a shop worker. Often these are just functions or projected identities, but our true identity is what much deeper and much more multi-layered, and not just a title or a role that you're given. What I was dealing with earlier so I reoriented my I won't call it work-life balance. I don't like that term, but the way I spend my time about 5 years ago to now more time for writing. And I now work only 3 days in the NHS as a clinical director at NHS headquarters. And what I was dealing with, there was an urgent request for a baby with a very rare, at Great Ormond Street, very, very rare condition. Only one baby every 5 to 10 years in this country. A request for an urgent request because the baby was due to be born within the next few days for an expensive, potentially life-changing drug. And I had to do a presentation. I was asked to do a presentation, even though this isn't an NHS day for me, on that. And obviously that was of vital importance. So hence I did that first thing today. And that's why I was late for the podcast.
We forgive you for that. Yeah. We really do. So Anthony, how do you there are a lot of people who will be listening to this and be thinking like that you find yourself stuck in a career where it puts food on the table and you don't love it, but it's what you do and it's kind of the path that you went down. And people think, in another life, I'll, do what I love, but it's not for this life where I need to be responsible and make sure that I feed my family. How do you, I'm a believer, and it sounds like you do, of making sure that we love what we do, and that can be different things at different times. Yeah. But what kind of advice would you give to people who think, I can't do that? It's not possible for me to kind of transition into some kind of work that really is an expression of something that I love to do. Like they struggle with that. Change is difficult for people.
I think there's two elements to that, which is the first one is loving what you do. Now, whatever you do, even if it may not be your perfect job, we all have the capacity and ability to be as present in the moment, in that moment when you're doing that work as possible, in the connection with the person and in the connection with the work you're doing, to do it to the highest quality and to be so involved and immersed that you can both, you get something from that, but you feel it's the human being rather than the human doing. You're not doing something, just being present in the moment with what you do, whatever that might be, a walk, going to work, doing a job, perhaps not your perfect job. So there is a richness that can come from engagement at that level in whatever you're doing, I think. And people often don't access that or don't have the ability. And I think, we talk about innate qualities, but they get covered up. So if you're angry, irritated, stressed about the job, your thoughts are whirring around, your ability to actually enjoy the job for what it is, as an example, gets very limited because everything else is going on. So I think there's that element that is open to all of us, and it's cross-cultural, and it's not just a sort of middle-class luxury, I don't believe, to be able to say, I'd like to do a different to enjoy that which you're doing in the present moment, rather.
So Anthony, I want to stop you before you go on to the second part, just because you brought up such an important point, and I really want to make sure that it lands with listeners, because essentially you're pointing to something that's inherent in human beings, which is the capacity to unconditionally love what we're doing, to feel unconditionally grateful, loving, and connecting to each moment in life. And the only thing that gets in the way of that for all of us is the fact that we do put these conditions on things. We think, well, if I was doing that, then I could be happy. And because we think, oh, well, if I had this in my life or that in my life, I could be happy, we start to have a lot of thinking about that. And that thinking kind of covers this natural kind of vitality and this natural capacity to love life and to love each moment. And so that's what we're up against. We innocently create these barriers to this natural joy that we have within us, which is independent of other factors. And that's beautiful because it's very hopeful. Because and what's interesting is that I've recently read a few books of people who have come to the end of their lives, and and such a shame. It often takes us as human beings till we kind of know that our lives, expiring, to suddenly see every moment is beautiful. And it can be raining, and I thought I hated the rain and only loved it when it was summer, but suddenly I'm loving the rain, and I'm loving my children fighting, and I'm loving anything because it's life. And so I just think that that's such a beautiful point, because it really is life changing, and it is something that we should be thinking about and reflecting on, because I think we go through our day a lot of the time thinking, if this was different, if this was different, if this was different, then I could feel good about life.
And, I can give you a personal, I'd like to just give you my own personal example of that. But just to your last point, the wonderful Eckhart Tolle says, accept every moment as if you'd chosen it. And I have that in the back of my head, and I have that on my wall in my study. Whatever happens, accept whatever hardship, challenge, difficulty comes, or other things, accept every moment as if you'd chosen it. You're not fighting against it. That allows you to be more present-centered, because you're not thinking about what you prefer to be doing, where you prefer to be, why is life throwing this at me, I should be in a different job. My own particular, it may perhaps a minor example, but prior to the transition we talked about before, I was working as the Global Health Director for government for about a decade. And I wanted to transition out of that. And the way I spoke about before, I wanted to have more time for writing. I wanted to use my time differently and spend more time creatively and so forth. And I had a lot of thought and worry and angst about that. I had a thought I'd done for 20 years. I've been doing the high-powered executive jobs. And I thought, what would it be like? Do I get my status? I think I do get status, importance, credibility from running big departments, from being on this board, from going to that executive committee. So the transition, you talked about how to do that transition. Part of that was battling those, or working through those thoughts. And of course, they are just thoughts. They're thoughts that give you stress and anxiety and create sort of certain kinds of feelings. But as I worked through the transition, and now I find myself also, fortunately, doing a NHS role of sort of social utility and of value, but it's on a different level. And I have a small team of 10 people, not running large departments with big budgets. I don't go to executive committee meetings and those kinds of things anymore. And it turns out I don't care. Now, so those thoughts about, well, what will it be like, or what will I lose? What was I attached to? Your attached well-being we speak about. It turns out they were false. That I don't mind at all. More than that, being present in the current job gives me wonderful space and time to spend much more time mentoring the junior doctors that are in my team and others, and coaching and supporting through their lives and careers, which is a much more natural element of human connectedness that has an essence to it that feels quite wonderful and important at the same time. So it's provided something different.
I love that you brought that up, because in a lot of the teaching that we do, we speak about the root cause of all suffering being these categories, these things that we've attached our well-being to, overlooking the fact that it's within us, that it's independent, that we're born with it. And when we settle down, it's our sense of security and self-worth, that we have what we need inside of us. But it doesn't look that way. It looks like status, as you said, who I am in the world. That can give me more well-being, or it can take my well-being. More of it gives me more well-being, and less of it takes away my well-being. And as you said, the thinking supports it, because we're always thinking from a certain premise. So if the premise is, I need status in order to feel good about myself, the thinking will support that. So even the threat to that I might leave this job, which my status relies on, suddenly the thinking's going to worry. It's going to look like there's some kind of threat to your well-being. So, so when you say, well, the thoughts are just thoughts, but to me, they're more than that. They're following a certain premise. They're following a certain logic. Our mind's always trying to help us. So when it sees that there's a threat to our well-being, it's kind of going to worry about that, which is very natural. But you seem to have really challenged that premise, the fact that you need status in order to feel okay about yourself. And when that premise weakens or fall away, the thinking around it falls away too. And I think that that's wonderful. That's what we call insight, and it's a beautiful example of a human being finding freedom in a particular area of their life. That something that was chaining you, that seemed to have power over you, falls away and suddenly opens up more freedom. So, beautiful example of that.
And Terry, you know what happened in that space, in that period, when I eventually left the global public health job, director job that I've been doing for a decade, before I started doing this part-time NHS role that I'm currently doing. It was in that space. So eventually I left because I think I read quite a lot of books about transition. You spoke about transition. It is tough. It is difficult. It takes time. It's different for different people. But at some point there's an element of bravery required because, as you said, the thoughts have a momentum of themselves, but they're also reinforced by social structures that perpetuate a certain kind of thinking.
Yeah.
I remember when I did my philosophy degree, all the doctors and consultants around me were saying, Anthony, what are you doing? Get on with your medical training, finish this. And I thought, well, I've always wanted to do a philosophy. That's what I want to do now.
Yeah.
I can't think. So when you're in a career transit, so those structures and thoughts and the structures that reinforce certain kinds of thoughts that then get their own momentum are always there, and they're often pushing in a certain kind of direction. It's not necessarily the most creative and most wondrous direction.
Definitely. Yeah.
And there's an element of bravery of at some point of saying, I've got to follow my inner wisdom as best I can.
Yeah.
I've got to follow what feels right for me as best I can, no matter what's being said. So I eventually left that job. And it was at a time, and I didn't have the next one, and I hadn't not had been in it for 25 years. I think I've been working. I hadn't had a sort of pause between roles, so it was a bit strange. But in that period, it was a period where my father was terminally unwell and died, so I was able to be very present for that. I was able to be very present for and involved with a huge amount of work. My mother died 12 years ago, so my father was we had to look after his estate, and I did a lot of that with my sisters. We did a huge amount of work of packing up the house in Hendon and selling it, and so I was able to be there for that. There were some other family health problems within my own family that I was able to be present for, and in that space that was unexpected, but just letting go of the previous. Before knowing what the future held, the book deal came through in that space unexpectedly, and when that came through, that felt like, well, this is what's meant to be.
Yeah,
this is what's meant to be. And within a month or two, the NHS role had been advertised part time, and I thought that feels like that's what's meant to be as well.
Wow.
And sometimes one has to just take that leap. It's difficult. It can be a bit nerve wracking. And sometimes painful, and it's full of uncertainty, but there's uncertainty everywhere in life. But that step, I think, is a part of the process, and as an important part of the process. It's a leap of faith.
I love that you said that, and I know that it's not completely binary, and it's more nuanced. And from my own experience, even in the work that we do, trying to almost develop and scale a startup, I've seen that you're all the time, you're going against a lot of the time what the narrative is out there, telling you that this is important and you've got to do this and et cetera, et cetera. And you're kind of thinking for yourself. You're having enough confidence to think for yourself and also be prepared to make mistakes and see that it's just a way of learning, that we won't get everything right, and that's fine. And there will be difficult times, and that's good too. There will be moments, but because we committed to something, because you almost know where you're going, you have a North Star, and that is, as you say, it's the I mean, maybe Robert Frost said it's the path less traveled, but it is a path that there's a courage there. And it's not that you go out thinking I'm going to be courageous, but you realize after the fact that it's not the path that is more easily traveled, where we kind of
Yeah.
fitting into a societal norm, or what's expected,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think that's right. Now you mention that. I don't think I ever thought for a moment this is courageous. I don't think I ever thought doing doing a philosophy master was courageous in any particular degree. I felt I was lucky to do it. And I don't feel like, I didn't feel courageous, but I think there's an element of a leap of faith and having trust in the universe and trust in your own inner wisdom that one is making the decision that's right for you at that point in time.
I think that's an important point because, I've told in the opening session of the podcast a little bit about my story, and when I touched into this part of myself that where kind of wisdom lies and where these deeper feelings lie and where clarity lies, and thought, my gosh, I called it this invincible summer. And what it did is to challenge this notion that I was lacking. So I walked around feeling that like life was bigger than me, and I was like, it's almost like a Goliath and I was the David, or, and trying to take on the giant, but didn't have, kind of maybe God behind me like David had. So, but it kind of challenged that belief of lack. When you've experienced that, and I think every person's had a moment where in really challenging circumstances, they've touched into a part of themselves that is so powerful. And it's that when you start to learn how to kind of leverage that, it becomes your guidance, it becomes your compass. You learn to think for yourself. And I know that you're familiar with that part of yourself. And so I think that that's really kind of what you're talking to, that's what allows you to take that leap, because it's what you're being informed by it rather than being formed by all the other kind of voices and influences around you.
Human beings are born with and have inside of them the natural quality. We talk about them as being innate qualities of well-being, but innate qualities that make people who they are. Those qualities of hopefulness. You talked about confidence. Confidence is an innate quality to be brought with. It often feels completely covered up, but it's there. Hopefulness, gratitude, compassion, capacity to love, all those things that I've mentioned. They're all there, and being able to touch those and feel those and connect with those, including the wisdom that we're all born with, is something of immense value and importance. And you can feel it when it happens. For me, it happens at different points in time. I always think it would be nice to have that feeling or to be in that place for the main part of your day, but we come and go. And I know that one of the things through writing, we touched on this before, when I am writing, creative writing that is, I am immersed in a place, in a zone that feels so deeply in touch with something inside of me that is hard to put words to, where there's such peace and such creativity and such sort of blossoming and flourishing, and I'm not worrying about anything. I'm immersed in something completely deeper. And it feels like a beautiful place to be. And when I'm there, an hour, 2 hours can go, and I will be go in a second, I won't realize. And I look at the clock and I think, crikey, it's lunchtime. What happened there? And I think, but that was a nice experience. That was a good place to be. I'll get some lunch now. And we get fleeting glimpses of that. And sometimes we're hopeful we get, longer lasting feelings of that. And that is possible. And that's what human beings have the capacity for.
Definitely. And as you correctly said, and we talk about a lot in our learning over here, is that at iHeart is that we don't live in that all the time. And in fact, we call it being on track, and being off track is where most of us live a lot of the time. And that's a very rich place to live off track. That's the place where we grapple with life, where we learn about our insecurities, where we see what we've outsourced or attached our innate well-being to, what we think has power over us. And as we learn about that, we kind of chisel away at these kind of barriers to our well-being. That's where evolution happens. That's where progress happens. And the more that we can not even just make peace with that, but really embrace that struggle that happens when we're not in our well-being, where it's covered, the more learning that occurs. Because most human beings I've seen, I mean, myself included, our tendency is to distract ourselves from that struggle, to avoid it, to find any coping mechanism or self-soothing way to distract ourselves from that struggle, rather than to engage it and take it on. You said, like, you suddenly realized this kind of status, like, seems to bother me, the fact that I might not have the same status as I had, but you didn't then just kind of distract yourself from it, push it aside, etc., and carry on with your job. You got curious about it. You opened yourself up to it. And that's where, and I'm sure at times it was uncomfortable and you're facing kind of feelings of fear and being anxious. That's where we learn and evolve. One of the things that I'm very passionate about is helping children see that, I mean, not children, parents see that it's okay for our kids to struggle. That we've got to get a bigger tolerance of our kids grappling and struggling with life, because it's in that grapple and struggle that they learn and evolve. And if we're trying to rescue them from that, then they remain static and they don't evolve into human beings who have to dig deeper to find these resources, these innate qualities, to uncover them. So
the greatest, deepest, richest learning comes from life's challenges and struggles. And life is, as we know, a combat sport. So nobody is immune from any of those challenges. Nobody's immune from them. Some of the ones that have been particularly difficult for me. My mother died in 2010. Sorry, it's going to be 13 years next year. She died very suddenly. I was very close to my mother, indeed, as were my sisters, and my father had been married, a very happy, successful marriage for 49 years. And she died. She had a subarachnoid hemorrhage. She was the fittest person. She was a 70-year-old and looked 60 and had never had a day's illness in her life. My dad, who was quite a number of years older than her, smoked 40 Dunhill as a GP until he was about 50, was a walking medical textbook. He had every condition, high blood pressure, diabetes you can think of. There was never, in people's imaginations, there was never a question of who was likely to go first. But of course, that doesn't work like that. And my mum, out of the blue, had a subarachnoid hemorrhage in the middle of the night one night. That is a certain kind of stroke, not related to things like smoking, but an aneurysm in the head that pops and could have gone any time. And she was unconscious in the morning, and none of us had a chance when he's found her unconscious in bed. And although she survived in a coma for a week on neurosurgical intensive care in Queen Square in central London, and they tried to do things, it was futile. So none of us had a chance to say goodbye to her. We had to say goodbye, but not in an awakened state. And she survived for about a week, and we had to go through something that I don't know anyone else who's gone through, the turning the life support machine off and then watching the last sort of heartbeat in the neck of a loved one. It does happen, but it's uncommon, obviously. But that's what we did. And it was extremely traumatic and very, very difficult. And it had come out of nowhere. And it was and over the months that followed, it was hugely sad. But having said all of that, what I learnt about life in different dimensions and ways, and what I learnt about myself was immense through all of that, and it continues to be learning. I think of my mum as being still very much with me in spirit all the time, and the learning that I've got through that, including something as basic as don't take your relationships with your parents for granted. If you've got something to speak to about your parents, speak, because you do not know what's going to happen. Try to control uncertain, life is uncertain. We try to control it by getting attached to things that we think will provide security for us, which you talked about before. But life is by nature uncertain. You don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen later today or tomorrow. Neither do you, neither do the listeners here. And that was brought into very stark, relief in that happening. So one learns hugely. I learned hugely from my father through that and his resilience. He was beyond devastated, as you can expect, at the time. But what I learned from him, incredible about his inner nature, was although he couldn't see for the first few weeks see any life for himself before, but he'd always been very strong and had fortitude. And over weeks and months, he gathered himself. And by about a year, he developed a relationship with Helen, his companion, who he developed for I think 7 or 8 years, and had a new phase in his life where he became almost, my mum was the sort of matriarch of the family, with grandchildren and other children and others. And he took on a role where he took the grandchildren out for walks and to school, and he loved it. And he had a new phase of his life.
Yeah.
And my relationship, which had always been good with him, got even deeper. I got to know him. My mum had sort of maybe dominated relationships, but I got to know my dad in a deeper, richer way. We used to do, movies and dinner, nights out together, action films and that kind of thing, which we both loved. And I got to know him in a way that wouldn't have happened, I don't think, or probably wouldn't have happened, which was wonderful in its own way. Not expected, not what I imagined. But you don't know, we don't know what's going to be provided for us in strange ways, what the universe presents to us and what the learning is that comes from that. So I'd honestly say that the deepest learning comes from those experiences, as difficult as they can appear at the time.
Yeah, it's funny because, I love, what you've just said. It brings to mind something I wrote in my first book, which was not picked up by a major publishing house, but it was this quote that when it's dark enough, you can see the stars. And I just love that quote.
Yeah,
and
that's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
And it really speaks for me too. Often, I once was speaking to my mother and she was like talking to me about a period where it felt like there was a lot of stuff coming at her. And she was just like, I can't wait for life to just settle down and go back to normal. And I kind of said to her, Mum, like, if you look back at the last, 5 years of your life, there are moments of it settling down. But what is normal is these things that occur, it's what Joseph Campbell called the calls to adventure. That we're on this hero's journey and we have these calls to adventure, and those have ups and downs and twists and turns. That is life. We somehow have this expectation. Life's not supposed to be that way. It's supposed to be smooth. And these things are inconveniences. And if we can get over them and survive them, then hopefully it'll get back to normal. But these things are built into life to help us evolve. They are our life lessons. I almost feel like we think school finishes or college finishes or university at a certain point, but the university of life are these moments, and they put in there to evolve us.
Yes.
I don't believe we can evolve without them. And so it's just so wonderful how you describe, it sounds like some of the darkest moments of your life, intense grief, but looking at them as, as these are moments that are going to teach me something about life. And then looking to your father and saying, he's teaching me something about resilience. And, that's just fantastic. Yeah.
Mm.
So I wanted to ask you about, I know your lovely ex-wife, Elizabeth, and I know that, quite recently, in the last couple of years, you went through a divorce. And this is something that we haven't yet discussed on the podcast and that a lot of people go through. And I particularly had quite a few couples that I've been close to that through the pandemic and COVID, they had a breakdown of their marriage. And I just thought it might be really nice for our listeners to talk about what you learned about your marriage dissolving, because for many people it can feel as if I've seen people that it's crushed them, that it's almost been like their entire identity was in this thing that they built, this relationship and their future. And then I've seen other people that obviously it's painful and difficult, but almost see it as a new beginning, and have gone through it with a lot of grace. And I just wanted to know what your experience and your learning was going through a divorce.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing first I should say that we've been separated for 2 years, but we're not divorced yet. So
my apologies.
Just a minor factual
Does that
correction.
mean there's a chance for a comeback?
But I think for a lot of people, as people talk about COVID having an impact and that kind of thing, I don't know whether that's the case. Certainly, quite a lot of people seem to separate around that. I don't know whether that was the direct consequence of COVID or just people reassessing their lives. But the first thing I'd say is there's no getting away from the fact that it was has been a very difficult, challenging period. Not just this, we were separated 2 years ago, but in the sort of year and a half before that, and then maybe the 6 months in particular after the separation. Very turbulent, very traumatic. And when you've been in a wonderful, and I think Elizabeth and I would both say a wonderful marriage, 2 lovely children, great friends, very loving, it's a loss. It's a loss. And there are elements that feel like the loss of, I spoke about my mum before, my father's died, the loss, obviously there's not a bereavement involved here, but there's a loss of not having someone who was directly involved in your life on a day-to-day basis, who's on your side with you, your companion, and, in arms in times of stress, all that kind of thing. It goes. And that's, that is upsetting, very upsetting, and very difficult at times. And so I wouldn't want to try and reduce at all or suggest that it's not been really, really challenging at times. Having said all of that, like I mentioned before, I do think that these challenges are the greatest opportunities to learn about yourself. I really do. So I would say, honestly, the amount that I have learned about myself, including what's important to me, who am I really? So, okay, how resilient am I? What does resilience even mean to me in the face of this particular really, really traumatic, difficult time? The amount of learning I've had through this period has been immense. Has been life-changing in some ways. I wouldn't want anyone to go through the trauma of, the loss of a loved one in that respect, or the separation and the loss and the difficulties. It's not something you'd wish on someone. You'd like to have that learning without having to go through all of that. But that's essentially what was presented to me. That's what's happened in my life. You can't get away. I mentioned the Eckhart Tolle, accept every moment as if you'd chosen it. That one was that's been particularly difficult, but it still applies. Yeah. This is what's been presented to me. So how am I going to navigate this? What am I going to learn? What resources can I access? And I think I'd say a few things. I think my involvement in this understanding of how the mind works. Obviously I've been involved with you and the iHeart charity for a number of years, but also immersed in this understanding of how the mind works for for quite a number of years before that as well, has been incredibly helpful. I'd say incredibly helpful. It provided me with some grounding and understanding to help navigate those difficult periods. So that would be one thing I'd say. And the other would be that I've had moments of learning during the period that have been different level. So those kinds of, they sound trite I'll try and tell you one of them, okay? They sound a bit trite, banal when you try and explain. But I was, at the time, so this is probably a couple of years ago, but I was a very good friend and mentor of mine is Dickon Bettinger, who I know you know very well, and I love dearly. But I remember I was talking to him about it at the time, and I used the phrase, feeling heartbroken. And he said to me, he challenged that. I remember that. He challenged that at the time. It was a Zoom conversation. And he said, I know people use those phrases, but your heart can't really be broken. And I remember thinking about that, and I was, it's interesting through these challenging times. You want support and love from friends and family, and you get that. But you also need people, it's also important to have people who will challenge perceptions or challenge what you're saying in a constructive, loving, supportive way, hopefully. And that's what he was doing. And a day or two later, I was sitting in the garden one evening, having a whiskey, I think, on my deck, and perhaps feeling a little somber at the start of it or whatever. And I had this realization. This is the moment I'm referring to, the little sound trait, but it wasn't to me at the time. And I had this realization of what we spoke about before, but it was a felt realization rather than a cognitive realization. And it was that realization that, oh my gosh, I'm not, my heart can't be broken. Those innate qualities, my capacity to love, my hopefulness about the world, connectedness with people, ability to form new relationships, those things that are born within me, they can't be taken away. Oh my gosh, I thought, so nobody or no thing, nobody, including, you talked about the attachments we have, and that includes other people, includes your spouse.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, that's an attachment. My security, true internal security, is not dependent on those attachments. It's not even dependent on a loved one, a spouse, who you spent a long time with, living your life with, bringing up a family with. It's not truly dependent. It doesn't mean you won't be sad and really upset, and it won't be really difficult. But those innate things are not, they can't be taken away. No, as we say, no body, no person, and nothing, no thing, no material thing can take those qualities away. And I had this realization on this deck, and it was immensely powerful. I thought, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Because you then think about the future in a sort of different way. Yeah. You think of life as the possibilities rather than what's being taken away.
Yeah.
And then I had a further moment, of which I remember this. And then I thought, oh my gosh, everybody's got these abilities. Everybody's got these innate qualities. We're all the same. Isn't that incredible? Isn't that incredible? Yeah. And that feeling, that learning that I got at the time, it's sat with me, and I think it creates an understanding or a learning that it's obviously much deeper and richer than anything you can intellectually read about. Yeah. So when I say that life's challenges provides the opportunities to learn in a way that you don't get elsewhere, I really deeply mean that. And I would. You spoke about people going down different paths. I suppose the path that I've been on is one of feeling that, despite the trauma, the sadness, the difficulty, that the opportunity exists here. It is a new phase of life. It wasn't what I had in my imagined future of becoming grandparents together, which was only ever an imagined future in my head. It wasn't that, but it's something else. And let's see what that holds and what adventures or richness. And I would say it provides the opportunity for people to actually flourish, even though that, again, can sound a bit throwaway in this context, but it does. Yeah. And I would say, in my own way, I feel like I've learnt and flourished more in the last couple of years, in particular, 18 months, 2 years, than probably in many other periods of my life.
So, Anthony, thank you for sharing that. And just to say that I don't think when you speak about those moments, it's cliched at all. I think it's very meaningful and very deep. And I've got a feeling a lot of people will relate to it. I mean, one of the guests that's on this first podcast series as well is somebody you probably know, Max Gleason. And, he speaks about, when his wife and young children were murdered, like having a moment where it's deeply personal and not something that he wants to impose on anybody else who goes through, that tragedy. It was very, very unusual, tragic circumstances, that he felt that he would be okay. He knew that deeply. He had a moment, I'm sure he had many moments of not that, but he had a deep moment of knowing that and living that. And, and that does something for a person. It's, I'm sure, as what I heard between the lines from you, it's incredibly healing and it's incredibly hopeful. I remember actually speaking at a conference in Cape Town about resilience and this notion of innate resilience, and having a doctor come up to me. He was actually a surgeon in the audience. He happened to be married to someone. I didn't know who he was, but there was the head girl at the school that I went to, the secondary school in Johannesburg. She was a doctor herself. And unfortunately, very sadly, she died by suicide. She took her life. And he said at the moment where she did that, she just had a baby, a young baby. Like when he found her, he came up to me when I got down off the podium, and he basically said to me, I just want to tell you something. I didn't even know who he was at the time. This happened with my wife. As soon as he started to tell me the story, I knew who it was. And he said, in the moment that that it happened and I saw her and I realized, he said, I had this thought in me, I'll be okay. You will love again and you'll live again. And it was so deep and so life affirming for him. He said, and then it went, and then the pain and the shock and the etc. But that, he said, did something for me. And he was now, quite a few years later, remarried. He'd had another child. He'd rebuilt his life. And he said, like, I know what you're talking about because I experienced it in the worst moment of my life. And those moments, those glimpses of what's true for all human beings. And I love again that you said that when you felt it and experienced it deeply for yourself, your almost next thought was that this is a human thing, it's not an Anthony thing, because that was exactly my story when I felt it. That was the next thing that came to me. You realize you're touching into a part of yourself that is beyond an individual thing. I call it a soul thing. And so, like, to me, these things are not cliched. They can be, there's many people who can be skeptical and, kind of say that but I think it's very meaningful. I think it's very hopeful. And I think people will relate to it. I think people will relate to it because it's true and it's within us all. It's something that human beings experience, as you say, even in the darkest moments. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a nice and right way of putting it. It's a human thing. It's that realization deeply that it's a human thing, not a personal thing. Very powerful. Well, there's a powerful story you've just told. Wow. And it's a very, very powerful feeling. And of course, the strength that comes from having that experience and feeling, even in the context of the whatever has happened, whatever tragedy has happened around, or sadness or challenges happen, the strength that comes from that learning through that feeling is immense and long lasting. And you
Yeah.
can't get it, or you get it on a different level, different nature from someone explaining that to you, or reading about it, or seeing it in a film.
Yes.
It's of a different nature.
Yeah, yeah. And the only other thing I'd say about it, I often say to people that there's something about appreciating those moments for what they are. There's more truth packed into those moments than all the other 80% of the time where we're doubting those moments, and having all the insecure thinking. And I think, like, one of the things, it seems you've got a great North Star for appreciating these moments. I think that's been one of the things that served me well as well, is that these moments mean a lot to me. I look back on them like these are where I take guidance from, not all the other times where my mind's confused or doubting, etc. They're the North Star. They're showing me what the right direction is, what's true about life. So often in life, people will have these moments and then they'll kind of dismiss them as well. It doesn't matter because they're only coming 10% and the rest of life is coming 90%, so it must be that's more real or true. But, there's so much, I think that when you have those moments, you intrinsically feel there's something about these moments which is far more, it's just far more real than anything else that I experience in life. And so they become your kind of your compass or your true north.
Mm. Well,
Yeah.
it's good of you to say I've got a great North Star. I don't know whether I've got a great. I mean, I don't. I'm like others. One is, navigating one's way through things as best you can, and sometimes it feels like a struggle, and sometimes it feels very different. And
Yeah.
you try to do it with the greatest grace that one is able.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. So what is, I had a lot of questions down, which we've answered already about what, the most non-academic thing you've learned about yourself, but you've shared all of that. So I guess the question that I want to ask you that I don't think we've touched on yet, and we're going to come to the book next, but is, what do you think? You've been involved in different sectors. You speak to a lot of different people. I mean, I actually did want you to talk a little bit about in the pandemic when you became almost the advisor to the football stars and movie stars. I mean, you've really you've stepped foot into a lot of different places, a lot of different demographics. What do you think in terms of mental well-being and resilience? What do you think people are most confused by? What do you think the thing is that people are that really needs to be taught, or that people are coming up against in all these different sectors and struggling with as a result? Like, what's missing for them?
Yeah, so I have been involved and remain involved across a number of different areas or walks of life. But there's a common thread, and that is an interest in human well-being, and it's at its heart, whether it's in the NHS or through COVID. I mean, it was fascinating through COVID. There was a lot of talk about mental health problems, alongside obviously all the physical problems that happened during COVID. There's a lot of talk about uncertainty and the mental stress and strains that uncertainty bring. And I think I think that's provided quite an opportunity for the work that you and me, and the understanding of how the mind works, to bring to the table. I've challenged some of the discussions about uncertainty. I've, I don't know. This is an article. I don't know. It's on my Medium site, but this is something I wrote for the British Association of Child Psychotherapy. I think it's called their academic journal called "Time to Be Creative" about mental health in children. I think there's misunderstandings about uncertainty. And the mental health problems that exist. And I think that speaks to, and this is for both children and adults, you're seeing across the spectrum. Uncertainty exists in the world everywhere all the time. We just try as human beings, children and adults, to conceal and minimize. People tend to not like uncertainty, or they think or told they don't want uncertainty. They want things to be clear, direct, and certain. So we tend to try and attack to minimize this uncertainty that people think makes them feel bad, stressed, upset, anxious. They attach themselves to certain things, which we've touched on before. They attach themselves to money, they attach themselves to status, they attach themselves to other people, all kinds of things, in the hope that attachment will provide certainty and security. But of course it doesn't, because it's premised on a misunderstanding of how the mind works, that we don't get our security and our well-being from those attachments anyway. We get them from inside, from what we've talked about before. And all that's happened, I think, during the pandemic is, in some ways, it's raised the level of awareness of uncertainty. People have become more aware that they can't control the things around them through some of the awful things and deaths that have happened through the pandemic. They can't control what's going on around them. And it's raised the awareness of uncertainty, but that has provided an opportunity for mental health education around the sources of our mental well-being and mental illness, which I think has been quite significant. I'm impassioned about mental health and well-being of children and young adults, as I know obviously you are. Part of the reason is that not just that mental health problems are very prevalent; they really are. And there has been a rise, whether it's a real rise or an artifact of the pandemic, I'm not sure. I think they were probably always there, those problems. They've now just come to the surface. So we're now seeing the true levels of mental health problems in children and young adults that exist out there. And it's very significant. Um, but
You were saying that it's not just because there's been a rise that you're so passionate. You were going to
Oh,
say
yeah,
there's
so
another.
it's the statistics are stark. By the age of 18 to 24, 75% of mental health problems that appear in adults were there in childhood. Were there in childhood. And if you ask people who've had mental health problems as whatever they might be, I'm not talking about the psychosis end as a doctor, schizophrenia and that kind of thing. I'm talking about the common mental health problems, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, obsessive compulsive disorders, phobias and so forth. These sort of more common mental, they were there. You ask adults and most of them say, oh yeah, you know what? I had those feelings, those
Of
thoughts,
course.
they were there when I was a child. So the opportunity for us to intervene, or the importance of intervening in childhood and young adults, is huge. Because if you can intervene and stop those arising in the first place, you can avoid the mental health problems and morbidity of adulthood. So
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons why that's that's so important to me. And I think across all the areas of my work, including my children's writing, that's the theme at the moment. Anyway,
Yeah. So I want to now ask you about your book. Just one comment on that is that it's interesting that you say this uncertainty, which has always been there, right? Because life's never been we don't know what's going to show up, but got exacerbated for people almost in their faces with
yeah,
COVID,
yes,
and and the interesting thing from the work that I do and that you're involved in is that it points to the fact that this and we could use certainty or security. This feeling of security about life lies inside of us, and when it gets covered, right, then we don't feel certain or secure. I'm going to put those two words together about life, but it's almost, and that's a human thing. These two roads, this on track and off track that we describe, the one road is like paved with security, it's
yeah,
secure territory, and the other one's insecure territory, and we'll travel both regardless of what's there, because there can be nothing happening in your life and you can feel terribly insecure, no change occurring or no, etc. And then there can be, tons of stuff and change, etc. And you can be feeling very secure inside of you. So it really is an inside thing, and it's kind of finding that internal, compass and understanding what makes me kind of go more off track. We've got a great question. Do you think someone or something is giving you well-being or taking it away? I.e., putting a feeling in you. And if it feels like the answer to this is yes, then you're knowingly going off track down the insecure road, because now you've outsourced your innate well-being. You're on a way that your mind's thinking as if there are these powers out there that can, that can give or take away your well-being, and that's just riddled with insecurity and vulnerability and non-resilience. And we all go down that road, but understanding that, once you know that that's what's happening, you understand how the mind works. There's almost a resilience, a perspective about that. Okay, I can see which road I am. I've got some insecurity, but I know deep inside I'm still okay. It's covered up, but it's still there, everything I need. And that kind of gives you an overarching resilience, even if you're on that more insecure path. So these kind of very, very important messages, this kind of education, which is so important for adults and children alike. How do your books, because I must say, I haven't yet, as I told you, read the second book, but I did read the first book, and they gripping, they incredibly mysteries and fast move. They're just fantastic read.
mm,
So but the purpose of your book was beyond entertaining children. There's a deeper message that you've threaded through the book. So can you just tell us a bit about Edie Marble and what she is going through and how that's helping our young people?
Oh, absolutely. So I've become increasingly interested in the last few years, as iHeart Charity is, in how can we share this understanding with children across the country and the globe, children and young adults in particular, across this country and across the globe, as effectively and as creatively as possible. And one of the ways is through the fantastic educational programs that are provided through iHeart, and similar ones that others provide. But I had a thought as I was going through this creative transition that we spoke about at the beginning. I thought, wouldn't it be incredible? I want to write more creatively, and I was veering towards children's literature, as with the Perch the Cat book of a decade ago. Then I had a thought, a realization. I thought, wouldn't it be incredible if I could share the message of somehow of this understanding of the on-track, the innate well-being understanding, through the vehicle of fiction, because people don't really do that. And books are potentially an incredibly powerful medium. I mean, you can get books out to a lot of people through various means and mechanisms. So I had that idea. And initially, we talked also about social structure. The publishing world can be a little bit old-fashioned as well. There was a general feeling is don't put issues in children's books. They don't like it. That was some of the barriers I encountered first of all. But then I came to some publishing houses, and Crown House have been wonderful publishers who really relished the idea and thought, wow, that's exciting and it's progressive. And we still have to make the stories first and foremost exciting adventures. I'm glad you said the first book was gripping, because if you don't do that, children in particular, more than adults, will put it down after the first. We know that statistically. Children will put books down very quickly if they're not entertained. This is middle grade for 11 to 15, 16-year-olds. They'll put them down. So you've got to primarily make it, first and foremost, an exciting adventure book. Then the challenge, the skill, what's necessary, is how can you weave through or thread through, this was the challenge for me rather, this understanding in a way that doesn't feel heavy-handed, I hope, but on the other hand, provides some of the understanding and tools to help support the reader's psychological well-being in the same way as we do through programs taught in schools.
Yes.
Complementary. Would that be possible? And then I had a fantastic editor who was very senior, John Appleton, who got involved, and one thing happened after another. And I had this idea, the first book, as you said, the 5 clues. So the story of it's a 4-book series. And in the 5 clues, Edie Marble, she's a 13-year-old detective, she finds out a year after her mother, a human rights investigator, supposedly accidental death, that she's essentially going to the cemetery for the stone setting ceremony, which but is a Jewish ceremony approximately a year after the death. She was at the cemetery. She's wearing the coat that she hasn't worn for a year, since the day the teacher came into school, took her out of class to break the awful news. The sheepskin coat, she hasn't worn it and she wears it for the first time. And she's having a little private time at the graveside after the ceremony has been completed. And she puts her hand in her pocket, and she finds a note from her mum. And she finds a note, and she looks, it's an envelope, and it's got her mum's writing on it, and it just says, Edie. Now, I know you know the story because you've read the book, but her mum was investigating a corporate crime. It was public health related, but conceived before the pandemic. And her mum had been threatened by brutal villains and has left her daughter, for reasons that become apparent as you read the book, a set of 5 clues, hence the title, The 5 Clues, that her daughter needs to solve, both to bring the criminals to justice. And I don't want to ruin the story. You'll have to find out. The readers have to find out whether she does or doesn't. But you can imagine what happens. But at the same time, what learning does she? So that's the main thing. It's a detective adventure story. But but at the same time threaded through very gently in the first book. There's not that much in the first book. That was on a steer from editors and publishers, but it becomes more prominent through the series. This understanding that we've talked about innate well-being. And the way I have crafted it is that she learns through her mother's learning initially, that her mother had been interested in this, and she had picked it up and had a few conversations, and then she picks it up some more. And so Edie goes on a journey of self-discovery. So she's solving the crime, but she's finding out about, well, she's going through a life challenge, as we talked about before, the sudden bereavement of a mother she adored. She's going through her own life challenge. So what I try to craft in the book, or create in the book, is, what does Edie learn? How does this understanding about innate well-being help her in solving the clues, help her in getting through these difficult situations she finds herself in as she comes, face to face with some really devilish villains. But also, much more deeply, what does she learn about learning to live with the loss of her mother and the changed environment and the life challenges? And that's the first book. The first book, to the publisher's delight and my pleasure, has been shortlisted for 5 national and international awards.
Incredible.
Which has been wonderful, including the Crime Fest, which is a huge thing, Best Children's Book of the Year last year. So that's been really, rewarding. The second book, and I've continued, each book is a different, completely different adventure. So you picked up the second book. We feel the second book is even more powerful than the first. Certainly the publishers and my editors do. And it's got a different thread. It's got a different story about eco-terrorism, about some different cases she's investigating that come together, and different messages about why do things happen in life, which speak to the same issues and points about our innate well-being and how the universe works. And so there's a sort of connectedness between the stories that comes together, and I use that to try and explore further, not just the elements of mental health and innate well-being that we talked about, but also connected philosophical ideas about why do things happen in life, fate versus determinism versus chance. And the title of the book, Outside Chance, is a play on that. There's an outside chance that she's going to solve this case, but are things happening in life outside of or beyond chance for reasons that we don't understand and can't ever really sense, but there are reasons behind things happening, even the really challenging, including the really challenging, difficult things that sometimes people feel oppressed that life could have thrown this in their face. It's unfair. Why me? When maybe you should be asking, why not me? Why am I any different to anybody else? And so that's the story. That's the second book, and the innate well-being thread is stronger. There's actually a course taught in her school that she attends in book 2. Some elements of which might look a little bit familiar to you, Terry, when you
Well, I'm looking forward to reading it and to see what comes next. And there's a link in the notes to where people can purchase the book. And I think that, if you're a parent listening to that, or you, somebody who knows a young person, buy the series for them, because it's so important. I mean, first of all, it's lovely to have a new bright author on the scene with my kids are crazy readers. I've probably got thousands of children's books going up to the age of 18 in my house. But, the messages out there that, generally speaking, are in the movies, on social media, in everything that our children are consuming is, I would say, pointing to a message of lack, and that you need the stuff. If you have more stuff, then you can be cooler. If you look more beautiful, then you can be better. If you buy that, then you'll feel more worthy about yourself, and they all the opposite messages of what our children really need to hear. And finding these mediums, as you say, books which kids love to read and are gripping and page turning, and putting in a different message is so important. And it's a little bit while also with Ignite, our digital program, we thought, instead of just teaching children, what's going to hook them? What are they interested in? They're interested in gaming. They're interested in superheroes. They're interested in, movies. So we look to the themes children are interested in and then taught through that medium. So I think that if we want to be sending and educating our young people with different kind of messages, we need to find ways. I think that's the one important thing that you've done, is do it in a way that's going to switch them on and engage them. They need to be engaged in enjoying something first. That's how we learn as human beings. When we're enjoying something, we get our minds open up to learning. So that's just kind of really well done and good for you. I think this series is going to be immense, and I'm looking forward to reading the second one now.
Terry, thank you. And if I could just say, the reason why I showed up an article that I'd written for the Children BACP journal recently, and I called it "Time to Be Creative Around Mental Health" for two reasons. It wasn't about the book, but it was about the main theme in that article is it's time to be creative around mental health education in children and young people. The models that we've used in this country and internationally of mental health education have not been working. So the more CBT based and that kind of approach, although it has some value, has not been working on a long-lasting, broad basis.
Yeah.
So we need to, and I've spoken, with colleagues in NHS at the senior level about this. We need to think in mental health education, which is why I'm so proud and passionate about the work that iHeart's doing, about creative, different ways of sharing and understanding around good mental health, psychological well-being, resilience. Because the old ones aren't really working. Look at the statistics. Look at the prevalence. Things are getting worse, not better.
Yeah.
So whatever, which isn't that much, is being shared and taught, isn't really working very well at the moment in the main or on a large scale. And so it's time to be creative around that, and creative about the ways in which you then share or transfer that information. So I think the programs, that iHeart does, the Ignite program, incredibly imaginative.
Yeah.
I've tried in my own way to be creative here. That was part of my endeavor, was to be, are there other creative ways? What about using fiction as a vehicle for this, even though traditionally the publishing world didn't really like doing that, as I said earlier, using, putting issues in essentially fiction books. But why not? Why not? You may have to be clever or think carefully about how you do it so people don't put the book down, obviously, but why not?
Absolutely. I'm so with you. I mean, we always start off with, who is the child that we're speaking to? And the average child is, and you say we picture a 13-year-old boy, 15-year-old boy or girl on TikTok with, not a lot of attention span or etc. And we kind of write a profile of who this person is. So what's going to engage that person? Not some kind of fictitious, made up, perfect child that we have in our mind that lived maybe in the, when I was growing up, and there weren't any of these. It was a different world. So we have to see, how do we speak to and engage with a child living in this modern area with social media and all the other stimulation that's being thrown at them. So I'm with you, and we'll keep challenging ourselves in that direction when it comes to our work with young people. And I know that you're doing that, and and I'm sure that there are many other people who are thinking about this. At least I hope there are, and we do know a lot of people like that. We need more. And because it's, as you're saying, the whatever's out there is not working, and so we do need more solutions and more innovative thinking. So definitely.
And could I say one last thing is, I welcome feedback. So for children or their parents or teachers, I mean, there's quite a lot of reviews from teachers and librarians on the website. The feedback's incredibly important. So if people are reading either of these books, please feedback. If you want to feedback to me, there's an email address for Edie Marble that I pick up. You can do that. You can put things on my Medium site. You can put comments. You can put things on reviews on Amazon and Goodreads and all kinds of places. But feel free to feedback about things that you liked and think work well, or things that can be improved. I'm writing book 3 at the moment. Hearing what works and what doesn't work so well is helpful.
Yeah, you want to hear from your readership. What is the best? Would you be able to tell the email? What's the best email address for people to
No,
contact you
well,
on?
if people want to, they can email. There's an edmarble Gmail address. That's ediemarble edmarble@gmail.com. But that's
Yeah,
if you want an email to get to me. There's other ways though. My Medium site, which maybe you can put the link there because it's
we'll
got
put the link.
articles about this theme, including this the piece that I just mentioned before. People can put all kinds of comments on there, on the different articles and pieces on that site. As I said, they can feedback to Crown House. Crown House
Mhm.
have a website for my books dedicated to me. So there's various ways in which people can do that if they're inclined.
Okay, lovely, lovely. So, Anthony, one more question for you.
Hmm.
What is the thing that you want to learn more about in the coming months? What's on your mind? If there's something that you'd like to learn more about, that you're reflecting on right now, what is that?
The what is really on my mind at the moment is it's not going to be the kind of thing maybe you're thinking about. It's not a sort of issue or a problem. It is much simpler than that. It is how to live on a daily, on a moment by moment basis, being as present as possible. That really is truthfully what's on my mind.
Lovely.
If that's the right saying, it's on my mind. If it's always it should be on my mind. That is my endeavor in life. And
Yes.
in some ways, not looking towards, I look much less these days towards, well, what's next? What's the holiday to plan? I'm thinking a lot less about the future than the now. Maybe it's some of that learning from life's challenges and separation,
Yes.
all those kind of things. But I'm really endeavouring to be, so whatever I might be doing, whether it's going on a walk on Hampstead Heath, which I might do later today. It's a beautiful sunny day.
Mm-hmm.
Just being present in that moment to enjoy seeing whatever there might be to see in that moment. I was last week. I was did manage to get away to America, and I was in a incredible Kew Gardens like place called Longwood on the East Coast, and they had an orchid house there, which was like nothing I've ever seen. They had something like about 200 different orchids in one huge space on the walls. And it was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen. And I spent some time there, and I was almost moved to tears at the beauty of nature in seeing these incredible orchids. And so that is what's on my mind, being as present as possible, and in being as present as possible, trying to be the best version of yourself. So whatever the work you're doing, whatever might be presented to you, whatever the conversation you're having with somebody, or if you're writing, or if you're playing a musical instrument, um, doing that as present centered as the best of your ability. And beyond that, life will unfold. There is
Mm-hmm.
some planning that needs to be done, but we don't need to do as much planning as we think we need to do. There's
Yeah.
there's some paying the bills that needs to be done, but we don't need as much of the material stuff that we think or are told we need. So being as present as possible, and learning along that road when I'm not as present as I'd like to be.
Well, that's wonderful. I mean, that really speaks to just, I think, what comes through this conversation is really your humility, first of all, how understated you are and how curious you are about life. There's a curiosity, and even, the field that you chose to go down can have a lot of certainty and science and data, but it's almost like you've been challenging and reflecting and looking in all directions and questioning and learning. You've got a real, we kind of born with this curious mind that wants to learn, and sometimes that gets stunted, or it feels like it gets, curtailed, but you can see that alive in you, and that's really, really beautiful. And it's a nice, I think it's a nice way to end, because it almost feels like there was a common thread through this conversation, that yes, we're going to do better at times, worse at times, sometimes be very present in our well-being, sometimes be less so. But if we can have an open, curious mind, we will evolve. Maybe not in the most linear way that we'd like to, but there's a way that we'll see progression over time because our minds are created to learn. And so, that's a wonderful quality. And it's a quality that to me goes hand in hand with a resilience, with human resilience is a learning mind, a mind that learns, that adapts, that questions, that doesn't always get it right and learns from where it's not getting it right. So really, thank you, Anthony. I mean, it's been fantastic. And I'm sure people are going to really enjoy this conversation, and just good luck with the rest of the series. And, maybe I'm going to read this and then I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask you, so come on, give me a clue of what happens next. It's good to know the author and have a bit of an inside, but really, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Terry. It's been wonderful to be talking with you. Thank you for asking me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please follow or subscribe so that you can stay up to date with our latest episodes.